Are we ready to start, Laura?
Yep, we can start whenever's good.
Okay, so good morning or good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Good time, wherever you are, and welcome to this session. The session that is going to start. Well, let me introduce briefly myself, Oscar Pastor from University Politécnico Valencia in Spain. Happy to be here, chairing this very attractive session with three very interesting talks. The first one is going to be presented by Thomas Drava, comparing digital platform times in the platform economy. I guess that it's a word that is coming from the Ghent University. So Thomas, the audience is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So today I'm going to present my paper comparing digital platforms types in the platform economy. So an issue in the platform domain is that there is a lot of confusion about the different digital platform types. So especially the term digital platform is very overloaded, and there is a lack of agreement between what the definitions really mean and to compare these types. For example, digital marketplace, a peer-to-peer platform, hybrid platforms, multi-sided platforms, crowdfunding platforms, and etc. A lot of these types are really buzzwords, which everybody wants to use because everybody wants to be part of it, because it attracts funding, everybody knows, everybody's heard about it. But this also creates a lot of confusion, especially in research, because everybody's talking about it, but they use different definitions depending on the paper. So this is why I created 3 artifacts, or at least I created 2 artifacts and a third one, the ontology is still under development, to aid to solve this issue, or to at least partly solve this issue. The first artifact is a taxonomy, and this taxonomy gives an overview of all the attributes that the platform can have, so how platforms can differ between each other. Then a second artifact is the typology, which is an overview of all the types that are found in the literature, how they are related to the attribute values of the taxonomy, and it really helps to compare the different platform types that exist and that people talk about. And the third artifact is the ontology, and the ontology is a conceptual model based on UFO, foundational ontology, and that captures the knowledge behind a platform and the different attribute values. And it therefore really captures the knowledge behind the differences of the platform types. And in combination, these 3 artifacts can really help to improve the communication between different stakeholders. Think about the platform management, the platform owner, but also developers and regulators, because all these stakeholders come from a different background, and they use terms, the terminology can be different for each stakeholder. So it really helps to create some common language that all these stakeholders can speak, so that the communication improves a lot. So this is the methodology that I used. And for the taxonomy development in 3 steps, I used the method of Nickerson et al., a paper from 2013, to eventually develop the following taxonomy. And I will explain it with an example that's easier. So think about Airbnb, which is a multi-sided platform, because it connects 2 different user types, the home owners and the home renters. Both users can register and eventually create transactions between each other. It's a decentralized platform because they can choose which accommodation they want to rent, and the offering is not allocated automatically to a user. It's peer-to-peer, it's even C2C, because it's actually transactions between individuals most of the time. I, for example, can rent an apartment on Airbnb tomorrow and rent out an apartment on Airbnb the day after. It's user-oriented because it both includes a product, the accommodation itself, and a service, a time-related service, because you can rent the accommodation for a couple of days. There's no immediate access, because most of the time you just rent it for in a week or 2 weeks. And it's underutilized because the homeowner can use the apartment himself the next week after you rent it, which is an important attribute to check if it's a sharing economy platform. So, and then my second artifact is then the typology, which gives an overview of the types, and then it's also related to the attribute values, which makes it very easy to check, all right, which type is Airbnb. And then you can see that it's super and subclasses, that Airbnb is allocated to all these types. But most important is it's a sharing economy platform following the definition of Franken and Schoch, because Airbnb is multi-sided, transactional, peer-to-peer, decentralized, user-oriented, underutilized, and customer to customer. So this way it gives a simple overview, and it's very easy to see, all right, Airbnb is not an on-demand platform because it's not centralized, it doesn't offer immediate access, and etc. So in my last artifact that I've developed is an ontology, which is partly based on the taxonomy in the first place. And for that, I use a method of my own that I developed previous year. And the ontology is based on UFO, the Unified Foundational Ontology, and is described in OntoUML. And this is part one of the general model that is applicable for all digital platforms. But I'm also working on creating a module for each attribute value to really capture the differences, which is gathered on the following site, but it's still work in progress. What's the eventual goal of this ontology? Well, the eventual goal is that it can be applied to existing digital platforms, but even platforms that are still in development or that you want to develop. And this could really help to create these customized models and help to understand a certain platform, improve the communication, and eventually really helps in the development. For example, here is an applied ontology module for Airbnb, and it really helps to understand, all right, there are two different types, the homeowner and the home seeker, which are both registered users. Eventually, a homeowner can create a listing on the platform, set a price, which can then be searched for by the home seeker. They create a booking, and eventually they can both review each other. This way, there's an aligned terminology. Everybody's talking about the same stuff. Everybody knows what it includes, and it also captures the constraints. For example, the cardinality constraints. A booking, for example, is bound to one specific homeowner, one specific home seeker. So this really helps to narrow down what everybody's talking about. Well, 10 minutes, quite short. Well, this was my presentation. Thanks for listening. So if you're interested more in my research, please check out the site, www.modeleplatform.com, or send me an email. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Thomas. We have time for questions. So if you have any question, please, you can use the Q&A channel. I see that there are not yet. I just encourage you to do it. I have a couple of them to start and to move the audience also. Thomas, well, you know, I like this kind of ontological base view of problems and looking for solutions. But it was interesting to me. I was curious because when you see that well, the sequence of components in the solution is taxonomy, typology, ontology. Well, the foundational ontology, and you are using UFO, that is a very sound ontological background. It seems to me that this ontological perspective should be the first one, not the last one, because in some sense, when you are working with foundational ontology, when you are characterizing conceptually a domain as the domain of digital platforms types, this UFO perspective one could think that is the starting point, not the last point. So this is the first question, more than a question, it's a curiosity. Why are you putting the ontology at the end, when theoretically, when you are doing the taxonomy, you are already starting, or one could think that you are already starting to create the ontology? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the reasons is actually that's partly what I do. So indeed, first of all, you have to, but since the platform domain is quite complex and there are also a lot of difference between each other, you first have to check what is the common ground. So what do all digital platforms do? And to know what is the common ground, well, you first have to check also what are the differences. And this is why I started first with the taxonomy. But this is also why I split my ontology into two parts, let's say. The general model that is valuable, that's valid for all digital platforms, independent of its type. And it's true that actually this is more the basis. So this indeed can be presented or is independent of the taxonomy and the typology and really helps to understand the highest level of the domain. But eventually the ontology also captures the differences between the platforms. And the differences are captured in the taxonomy. So the difference between multi-sided, one-sided, centralized, decentralized, etc. So the ontology is indeed partly the starting point, at least the general model is, but eventually the different ontology modules capture the differences. And to capture the differences, you first have to get an overview of the differences. And this is what my taxonomy and partly my typology does. So you're partly right that the ontology is a starting point, but at least then it's the general model, as I call it.
When you divide or you structure your work in these three steps, taxonomy, typology, ontology, we could say that the two first one are in some way indicating how to or starting how to create the ontology that at the end you want to provide, right?
Mm. Yeah, that's true.
Okay, yes, you have said something also. It's interesting. Is well, you are to try to have a shared conceptualization of digital platform types. Seems to be a very attractive goal. What about the conceptual coverage of? Well, I mean, you are doing you are trying to create elaborate the ontology for that to provide this shared conceptualization. But the diversity of the working domain is very big. So we find different digital platform types. Have you accumulated evidences that the conceptual coverage is adequate? Because you are for instance showing that for the Airbnb case is perfect, is working well, but there are many different types. So how to assess this an adequate conceptual coverage? Do you have any? How are you planning to face this problem? Even if I understand that the ontology by definition is trying to do that, but you know the diversity is very big when we talk about digital platform types.
Yeah, that's true. I tackled this problem by combining both previous literature with a sample. So I have included a sample of, I think, 30 or 40 existing digital platforms of different types. And I tried to map them on the ontology to really apply the ontology on the specific model, like I did in Airbnb. But I also did it for a lot of other existing digital platforms, like Ticketswap, Uber, and etc. And this way, I try to make sure that my ontology includes or captures at least all these different types, or the knowledge and the differences between all these different types, by really combining the both previous literature and the samples. So let's say like the real world.
Are you planning some? We have already some question. I will go in. We will enter them. But first, let me just complete the previous one that I did, asking you about. Well, it is very interesting to use the ontological background, the shared characterization that you are proposing for improvement. So, for instance, I guess that you have analyzed in depth the Airbnb case. Any initial evidences of, for instance, improvements? Have you detected things that could be used to improve or to make a kind of auditory of platform types in order to detect defects and even providing correction to this defect? Because this seems to be an interesting application case of your work that I don't know. This is my question. If you are exploring, that is to use this idea to audit digital platform types and well, to create a kind of consultancy of digital platform types quality. Is it
Yeah.
a right idea?
Yeah, this is the idea behind it. Of course, it's not that my ontology is meant to improve Airbnb, for example. I mean, that's a billion-dollar company. I think it's more practical to use it for
Well,
new ideas.
you can be ambitious and trying to do it.
I think the main, I think it more helps in finding new ideas and to really that everybody is on the same line. So now I'm using thesis students to really develop different new marketplaces. For example, in the health sector, we're working on in crowdfunding and etc. So really from the ground up for prototyping. And for that, it can really help. So especially when you are developing with multiple persons, and there are also persons that don't have an IT background, it really helps to, let's say, like, all right, it should include this one and this one. It should include the registration. The transactions should be between that type of user and that type of users. We allow this kind of review, but not this kind of review. Because I'm also working further on including business model variations into the ontology. And this way, it can really help in the first development, like the prototyping of a new marketplace or platform IDs. But I don't think it will ever reach a level that existing platforms like Airbnb, billion-dollar companies that are so specialized in what they do. I don't think it's meant for that. I don't think it can ever help to improve. I think it can help them to understand more and communicate and improve the communication in Airbnb, for example. So, for example, regulators understand it more. And but I think the best way of using it at this point, in my opinion, is for prototyping.
Okay, perfect. There is people are encouraged to ask. There is a following up. There is an interesting question from Istvan saying that did you think of using your taxonomy for helping or even automating the regulation of platforms or their participants? For example, in the case of Airbnb, any offer that is not underutilized could ring the alarm bell in cities with housing problems. That is just maybe just following up what you said and yet using your ideas to detect something that could be really improved.
Yeah, I think it could help. I don't think. I think it could help regulators, especially to understand the phenomenon and to understand and create better regulation. Automating it seems a bit far-fetched, in my opinion, more difficult, especially because it are quite subjective concepts most of the time, or not subjective, but difficult to check. For example, when is something underutilized? Well, when the homeowner uses it himself, but how do you check it? But at least I think it understands, I think it helps to understand multiple stakeholders. For example, regulators, what should at least be required to be a sharing economy platform, and for example, have tax advantages in that case. Because, for example, I think that sharing economy platforms have a tax advantage in Belgium, for example, but it's not even really well defined what a sharing economy platform is, which is now a lot of law cases about, what's the difference between Airbnb and Uber. I think Airbnb is now allowed this tax advantage, Uber is not. And but why this is? Well, this is quite difficult to grasp. And for that, an ontology and the taxonomy can really help, in my opinion, for regulators to really talk about the same thing in the first place.
Okay, so there is another question from Leandro Jesus. He's saying, hi, Thomas. Why did you exclude the innovation platforms as defined by, for instance, Evans and Gower from your scope?
I first included them, but at this point, the innovation platform definition was a bit too broad, and it was very difficult to grasp it. So I'm planning. I hope I can include it later on, because indeed. But I wanted to focus. Innovation platforms are a little bit less out of the domain, out of the platform domain in literature. So it goes a little bit further away from digital marketplaces. So this is why I haven't included it yet, or I have excluded it in this part of my research, but I hope to include it later on.
This makes me go back to my first question, where I was asking about the coverage of the ontology in a so diverse working environment. This is an example of well, other digital platform that could be just explored. And well, the thing is that I understand that the ontological background that you are elaborating is under continuous change, is dynamic. You mean that you have to be open to detect new concepts that should be in some way modified, or should be should make the ontology evolve in some way, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. This is why also I focus a lot on the method, because I mean, I'm not the how do you say, I'm not some kind of the lord of digital platforms that should decide this is this type, this is this type. No, it should be some kind of indeed a continuous improvement, a common effort. So I really hope that others continue on my work, so that they really see like, I think that you excluded this type wrong, or it's just how do you say, it's a first version. But I think how the platform domain evolves can really change this the taxonomy and the typology. So it's not that I have all the answers in a domain as complex as digital platforms.
Okay, and just if there are no more questions, just to end the discussion part, some words about the current state and the next further work, because well, I know that UFO has a very interesting tool support that is the onto UML based. So with if you use onto UML, if you have or you plan to make any tooling support for this idea, you could implement in some way this ontology, and you could apply, as I was asking also before, you could apply this kind of audit-oriented studies. You could check properties of the ontology if you instantiate the ontology in concrete cases. So just as I told you, for closing this interesting discussion, what is the current state from the tooling and the practical perspective, and what are your immediate plans from this practical perspective?
Yeah, well, I'm indeed in contact with Thiago Prince's sales for to really help me to get the ontology in line with onto UML, and to use the tools that they provide and to work further on them. At this point, I'm mostly focusing on how the ontology models can easily be applied to really develop an applied ontology of your ID. So the idea behind it is that someone, and I will check it now with the thesis students, that when you have an idea, right, I want to create this kind of marketplace. I have an idea that, for example, nurses are allocated more easily with a review system to the right, to people that need them. That it's really easy to develop this applied ontology, so everybody understands it better, what he wants to build, how he wants to build it, and that it also helps in the development, so the full stack software, or at least the prototyping. So this is my my next step, to really make it easy to use. I don't want to go too deep into the specific. I don't want to make it too complex. For me, it's important that people use it also without the knowledge or the deep knowledge of UFO or ontologies. It should be, in my opinion, used more in practitioners. So at this point, I try to make my research more applicable for people in the platform domain, which are a little bit out of the who don't have the specific ontology knowledge that a lot of people here have in this conversation have.
Okay, so Thomas, thank you very much for the presentation, for the answers. My warmest regards to the fantastic team that is with you, with Thiago, Frederick, Gert, so all close colleagues. Congratulations to all of you.